Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a short bio on Nick Diaz. The Stockton, California native is a polarizing figure in MMA and a legend of the sport. Let's dive into Nick Diaz's career and journey. Nick Diaz is considered a pioneer of the sport in many ways. As stated, he's a legendary fighter and fan favorite. He's competed in UFC, Pride, Strikeforce, Elite XC, WEC, Dream, and Shudo. He's the former welterweight champ of Strikeforce and WEC. He has a third-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Cesar Gracie. And in general, he's an avid and passionate martial artist. Nick Diaz was born and raised in Stockton, California. He attended Tokay High School in Loki, California. Diaz began training in karate and aikido from an early age. He also participated in wrestling tournaments. At age of 16, Diaz began training Sambo. Then he migrated over to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He was awarded his black belt by Cesar Gracie in 2007. Just before Diaz made his professional debut as a mixed martial artist, his then girlfriend at the time took her own life by walking in front of traffic. Very tragic event. After her death, Nick Diaz would run to her grave every day and made a promise to her after her death that he would become the fighter that she always wanted him to be. Nick used and took a tragic and painful event as fuel to make him as the great fighter that he's known for. Nick's professional MMA debut was in 2001. It was just after his 18th birthday. He won his fight and submitted Mike Wick via triangle choke. Nick Diaz became a champion in his second professional fight, defeating Chris Lytle for the IFC welterweight title, and that was in 2002. Continuing his career, Diaz moved on to WEC and won their belt at welterweight in 2003. He won via submitting Joe Hurley with a Kimura shoulder lock. Shortly after, the UFC noticed Nick Diaz, signed him, and he made his debut at UFC 44. In one of Diaz's more memorable fights, he competed against Robbie Lawler at UFC 47 and wound up knocking out Lawler in the second round with a right hook. He went on to have great fights with Karo Parisian, Diego Sanchez, Joe Riggs, to name a few opponents. After going on a little skid, Diaz went back on a winning column by defeating Josh Neer at UFC 62, Gleison Tebow at UFC 65. He left the UFC, competed in Pride, where he submitted Takanori Gomi via Gogo Plata, one of the few times a submission was ever pulled off in MMA. The win was overturned after Diaz tested positive for marijuana. From Pride, Nick had a great run in Elite XC. He amassed 3 wins there. He competed for Strikeforce, having great fights with Frank Shamrock, Scott Smith. He won the Strikeforce belt in 2010. Diaz went on to win 3 more times in Strikeforce. He returned to the UFC at UFC 137, where he defeated fellow legend V.I.P.N. via dominant unanimous decision. At UFC 143, Diaz lost the fight against Carlos Condit for the interim UFC welterweight championship. He then fought Georges St. Pierre for the UFC welterweight championship and lost that fight via unanimous decision. At UFC 183, Nick Diaz competed against Anderson Silva. He lost that fight via unanimous decision, but the fight was ruled a no contest after Silva tested positive for steroids and Nick once again tested positive for marijuana. After the UFC 183 bout against Silva, the Nevada State Athletic Commission suspended Nick for 5 years and fined him $165,000. He went through an appeal process. The sentence was reduced to 18 months and $100,000 fine. Since then, Nick did reach an agreement with the Nevada Athletic Commission. He is free to compete in all forms of combat sports. In 2018, Nick got slapped by USADA with a 1-year sanction for failing to report his whereabouts to USADA on 3 separate occasions. Nick was free to compete again on April 9th, 2018. As you all know, there's been a buzz in the air regarding Nick Diaz competing against Jorge Masvidal to avenge the loss of his brother. Nick stated he wanted that fight on an interview with Ariel Helwani. There has been recent footage of Nick training, getting back in shape. This is pretty exciting to say the least. Some personal thoughts on Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz is one of the most talented mixed martial artists to ever do it. He's well-rounded as a fighter. He has great boxing for MMA. His ground game is top-notch, world-class Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's one of the toughest fighters to ever compete, hands down. A true martial artist and fighter through and through. Loved by the fans and highly respected by his peers. I personally would love to see Nick Diaz back competing, but only if he's focused 100% and comes back in true form. Because if that Nick Diaz shows up, he can defeat anybody that's put in front of him. Hope you enjoyed this short video on Nick Diaz, on his career and beginnings. If you did, consider subscribing, like the video, share, appreciate it. Feel free to drop your thoughts about Nick Diaz as a fighter in the comments section. Would you be excited for his return? And what are your thoughts on the Jorge Masvidal fight? Thanks for watching again. Take care.